Steve Barnett, how are you doing today, sir?
Pretty good, pretty good.
And where are you located?
I live in Irvington on the
Oh, you're
city
in
east
Irvington.
side. Yeah.
And we're going to talk a little bit of political memories of you working with Andy Jacobs, Julia Carson, but hearing about Jim from the '60s, Jim Beatty. So and also just kind of touch back. You said you went to Purdue, and that basically you were born in '44, and you didn't really know Jim until around '75, and that also you were in social studies, and originally you were a teacher. So what was your bridge into politics, and what are the things that you knew about Jim from before you ever got to be around Jim and work with Jim?
Yeah, well, I'd always been interested in politics, and like I said, I didn't really do much until 1970. I was involved in the reelection campaign with Senator Harkey that year, and but I had followed local politics. I knew Jim was county chairman for all that time, and I suppose the thing that sticks most in my mind is that he and Andy and several others of that time were known as the Young Turks, and they had clashed with the more conservative elements of the Democratic Party in the '60s, and really were opening up the party to more liberal and progressive ideas, particularly involving the Black community, being more open and having their involvement in the Democratic politics. Jim was also much, like I said, the Young Turks. In 1965, in the state legislature that year, they attempted to move some legislation that would give more local control over certain aspects of government, particularly the Indianapolis Gas Company, which it continues to be a what they call a charitable trust, and is not controlled by the by the city. It's a public utility, but it's not a public entity. Um, anyway, Jim was very active in the legislature at that time, 1965, hoping to get some changes, but was thwarted much by Governor Brannigan, who was a Democratic governor at the time, and like I say, kind of a leader in the more conservative element of the Democratic Party, as I understand it. So there wasn't much accomplished in that legislative session, and I think there was frustration. I sort of recall Jim as expressing frustration the fact that we had a Democratic governor, and at that time we had a Democratic legislature for the first time in years and years and years, and we failed and able to get some very meaningful legislation through because of the more conservative aspects of the party at that time. One thing is sex, and I did not participate in this, but in the 1968 elections, I remember Jim telling a story that, in 1967, Jim had run for mayor of Indianapolis against the incumbent, um, name escapes me now. Anyway, John. Anyway, forgot. Anyway, Jim had worked for the city government. He was in city legal, and there again there was conflict between a more conservative aspect of the party in the mayor and Jim. So he ran for mayor in 1967 in the primary. He lost the primary, and John Barton, that's the mayor, John Barton. And so in 1968, what we did at that time, we elected precinct committee people every 2 years. And so in 1968, uh, all the precinct committee people in Marion County were up for re-election at that time, and there was a little struggle between the control of the Democratic Party, uh, between the forces that were supporting basically Mayor Barton and Jim, and so it was very important that the precinct committee people that were loyal to Jim Beatty get elected to the office. And because right after the primary, there was the reorganization of the Democratic Party. So anyway, Jim tells a story that, and Bobby Kennedy, of course, was running for president at that time in the Democratic primary in Indiana. And Jim and people around Jim were very supportive of Bobby. And he tells a story one time they have a meeting, I guess, of the Democratic of the Central Committee, and Bobby and Kennedy was asking, well, what can the party do for him in the primary election? And Jim said to the effect, well, your election's important, but my election is more important, getting these Democratic precinct committee people elected because they determine if I continue on as county chairman. So it was like, you got your election, Bobby, but mine it's all local politics. Mine is more important. So and Jim was very successful. Kennedy, of course, won the primary, and Jim was very successful in retaining control of the party for another couple of years. And like I say, in 1970 is when I sort of became active, and that year in 1970 is when Jim. I did attend the reorganization convention that year as an observer, and that was when he handed the chairmanship over to Tony Mayo, who was also a close ally of Jim's at that time. And then, like I say, it wasn't until the election of 1974, and by going to work for Andy after the election, that I really got to know Jim more as the years progressed after that.
How did you get connected to Andy? What was that transition for you?
Well, I was in 1974. I was I was the ward chairman in Northeast Ward of Marion County, 28th Ward, and
what? Just explain that for people that don't know. What was that role involved with?
Well, at that time, I had after I came back from Washington D.C. in 1973. Like I say, I sort of began getting more active in politics, and I was appointed the ward chairman for the 28th Ward, which had at that time around 30 precincts, and that ward ran basically the northeast section of the city at that time, along 38th Street, north of 10th Street, 38th Street eastward. And one of the things we did was I'd have a precinct meetings, and we would invite candidates to come out and speak to the precinct committee people prior to the primary in 1970. And I got to or 1974, and that's when Andy Jacobs' father was running for a judgeship here in Marion County, and I had known of Andy Sr. for a number of years, and I liked him. And anyway, of course, Andy was running for Congress at that time too, and so as a I'd say, I was a ward chair and as a precinct committee person and all, I was very active in trying to support their candidacies, and ultimately the election in 1974, which was a very, very strong Democratic election. And I had expressed some interest if of working with Congressman Jacobs if he returned to office. And so he was successful and returned to office in 1975, and they asked me to come and work for him in the local office here in Indianapolis. So that's kind of how I got that involved in that.
Now, when Jim started working with Jacobs, what were the original roles? What were you a part of with that? If you could kind of just explain when he got brought in, what was happening, and maybe what were the elections that were.
Well, of course, Jim and Andy have been friends, since 1960, 62. And Jim had done as county chairman and all. He had tried to put together tickets that, like I say, were expressed more of the progressive elements of the Democratic Party, of which Andy was a part of. And so they that friendship, had occurred all through those years. And when I started working in 1974, like I said, I handled primarily Veterans Affairs in the local Indianapolis office, but I still maintained my activity in the Democratic Party, and I was precinct committee person and ward chair and all. And so one thing I did after the election was to compile voter information, statistics for Andy's congressional district. And I shared. He came by the office a lot of times at lunchtime, and we'd have lunch. Other member of the staff, Loretta Rakes, we'd have lunch together and just talk about various issues. And he was interested in the statistical information that I had compiled about how the various precincts voted in the last election. And so I shared that information with him, and then I did that every 2 years, basically. And this is back before the age of computers. And what I would have to do, I would go over to the city county building, and where the election results had been printed out, and I'd go through the several number of sheets, going precinct by precinct, writing down on a yellow tablet the results for various precincts. And I don't know, I did obviously Andy's race, and then I usually picked a couple of other major races, and then some little minor race, like a township trustee or something like that, as sort of a baseline of the Democratic vote. And like I said, I did this every 2 years and shared them with Jim, and he was very eager to know how the election results went and what have you. And then election nights, Jim would invite people to come by his house, and I was part of the group that went by his house to watch the returns come in on election nights. And Jim just had a very, very was very intuitive about how things were going. I mean, he could call an election before the major networks would call the election. He knew, if you're involved in politics for a number of years, where the votes are coming from, and if the votes are not coming like they should be from a particular area, either you're going to win it or you're going to lose it. And Jim could tell that very early on in the evening with local elections. And that, we obviously watch the national elections and look by, governor's races, Senate races, obviously in presidential years, how the president's elections were going. And uh, particularly in presidential elections, I mean, there again, if you knew how things were going in the particular state, if it's going good, it's fine. If it's not, things are not going to work out well. So, and Jim had just a very keen knowledge of how to evaluate how elections are going. So those evenings were sometimes very good, and like I said, other times not so happy. But
For him is like a team leader, running a campaign, having all the different moving pieces of the puzzle.
oh yeah.
So, what are maybe
And
some
even after he stopped being
of the
county
people?
chair, even when he stopped being county chairman, he was still very interested in how for about up until the early '80s, I guess it was, very concerned about who was county chairman, because there again at that point in Indiana's political history, who's county chairman would impact how what candidates are going to be running and who's going to just exactly how you're going, where the levers of power are. And so in like I say, up until the early '80s, Jim and Andy and others were very interested in who the county chairman was and would put forth candidates to run for county chair. In the beginning, in the early '80s, it didn't seem to matter as much, and who was in control of the local political parties, as it seemed like candidates were drifting more away from uh, working with a political party or needing a political party for their support. Most candidates started running independent type campaigns. They would run with a party label, but yet most of their campaign was in a separate endeavor beyond what the party was looking at.
So, I just kind of touch back on what I was bringing up. How was he as a team leader? How watching him have to handle the people with all the different scenarios and locations in town and counting the vote? Just how did you witness him leading the people within the campaign itself?
Well, I think he was always well, when he was county chairman, he certainly was a very strong, hands-on person. When he was not the county chair, like I said, it was mostly looking at. He was obviously interested in Andy's campaign and how things were going. And Andy's campaign, basically you couldn't have a better candidate than Andy Jacobs, because he was such an unorthodox type of campaigner. People had grown to know who he was, and they either liked him or didn't, and most people liked him. And so his campaign, he raised very little money. He would maybe do. He really didn't do much in the way of campaign materials, bumper stickers and buttons and stuff like that. And I think we had maybe one or 2 years we had that sort of stuff. The only campaign that was really kind of questionable was in the 1982 primary, after the districts had been redrawn in Indiana. Another Democrat, Dave Evans, was basically put into Andy's district. So in the primary, Dave was running for Congress and Andy was running for Congress against each other. So that was probably the most uh, intense campaign that Andy engaged in, um, because there was obviously a split among the Democratic Party workers as to who they were supporting, and so it turned out Andy won. But what was interesting is um, about 2/3 of the new district was Andy Jacobs' district, and so a friend of ours of Jim's, Bill Schreiber, he would do a poll, and Bill had a kind of unique way of coming up doing polls. But anyway, he I think it was late in the primary campaign, and also somebody suggested that maybe it was Jim suggested they do a poll just to see how Andy was doing, and so Bill put together his team to do the poll, and it basically came back that Andy was 2-1 uh, against Evans, which was kind of a little bit of a shock because I don't think we quite thought it was going to be that much of a margin between the two candidates. And essentially on election day, that's what turned out. But like I say, going back to looking at the way the district had been redrawn, Andy's district was 2/3 of the new district compared to Evans, and that's basically how the election turned out in the primary. So there again. It was people felt comfortable. They thought things were going to work out, but still, it's kind of like, and maybe we need to do a poll just to sort of uh, ensure our, you know, to make sure that we have our feelings are correct.
So Jim obviously became very close with Jacobs over all the years. I know they, we're close to, not just political aligned, individuals, but they also were probably close to, I don't want to say best friends, but very, very, very close over the
Oh
years.
yeah, I would.
What are some of those, like, how would you describe their out of campaign or out of the office dynamic as they would communicate with each other, just watching them interact?
Oh, I would put them on par to being brothers. Uh, uh, I mean, they're very, 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 very close, and uh, in just all respects, just very, very close. And I remember when Andy died, and Jim was speaking at his remarks at his funeral. Um, Jim said, he really thought that uh, Andy would live beyond Jim's lifetime. That he really was uh, really not prepared for Andy's early death. And Jim said, I thought I would go in first. So that's the way life is. But no, yeah, they definitely had a close relationship. Like I said, as brothers. Loretta Rakes, probably she was the office manager in Andy's office here in Indianapolis, and had worked for Jim with the city when they were in city legal, and then she also worked in his law office, and those three people were, like I said, they were very, very close together with each other, and um, it was it was like I say, it was almost like brothers and sisters, you know, as far as their relationships. Um,
I mean, would you say? Well, Jim has a very great sense of humor. So
Oh yeah.
how is there, I'd say, jovial dynamic between Jacobs and Jim?
Well, Andy was a great jokester. I'm not sure. Can't really think of anything specific.
Nothing funny on the campaign trail.
No, I can't really recall anything. One thing, Andy was very close to another part of the crowd named Judd Haggerty. And Judd was an attorney and had run for prosecutor back in the 60s. Was not successful, didn't make it through the primary. But Andy and Judd, I mean, those two were, very close. As I guess they even more close than probably Beatty and Andy. But they would. Andy enjoyed um, what was that? Let's see, what do I call it? Oh shoot, my mind is just gone. It'll come to me anyway. What are they? Oh well, it'll come to me. I'll come back to that maybe if what I think I want to say. Oh well.
Well, just kind of
I'm getting up there too, so I
it's
have these
all right.
I have these senior moments.
It's all good. So you obviously got to see Jim be very strategic in his campaigns. What were some of the things that you think stood out to his approach to running campaigns, working with Andy Jacobs? What are some of the things that really kind of stand out of levels of accomplishment or unique things that he proposed that would help the process or expand the process even better?
Oh, well, I think I think the main thing about most in the campaigning was you basically running an honest campaign. Um, this was in contrast to some of the other people in the Democratic Party. I think that basically Andy and Beatty, that crowd, just had a more honest approach to campaigns. Um, didn't necessarily engage in dirty tricks. Um, um, and Andy particularly was, he was very frugal about spending the campaign funds and also where he got who his donors were. He refused to have, well, I don't forget, at least probably at least after the 74 campaign. He wouldn't accept corporate PAC money. Um, and I think basically small donations was basically what he wanted. He didn't have a large campaign budget, so and I think here again I had mentioned earlier about um, Jim and the direction the Democratic Party took under his leadership as trying to include more minorities into the party structure. But also there was a good relationship with labor, particularly the United Auto Workers. And uh, there again, I think you had some elements of labor that uh, was a little more progressive than others, and the United Auto Workers certainly demonstrated that. There was a good friendship with the local United Auto Worker leadership. Dallas Sells, who was um, I'm not sure exactly who he was. He was chairman of the state of the local labor council, and there was a good relationship they had together with Dallas. Um, but yeah, it just was like I said, an approach to politics that was a little bit unusual from the general run of politics at the time.
Right.
There was a view that you just try to do things in a clean, honest way.
So were there any other like kind of major benchmark moments that you recall happening that, Jim could kind of flash back to within the time of the politics and the campaigns and Jacobs being out in DC? Is there any other moments that you think that should also be mentioned?
Well, like I said, I think the 1982 primary campaign, was at least a major one that occurred during my activity. And then, in previous years, you had in the 1960s, there certainly were times uh, when Andy ran for Congress in '64, the 1968, when Jim was, trying to maintain control of the Democratic Party. Those were probably maybe the uh, three things that sort of stick out in my mind. I'd say particularly well, 74, obviously, when Andy was running again for Congress. But um, yeah, Jim was always he was the political guru, um, and had an uncanny way of understanding politics. Just um,
Well, and flipping from politics to family, did you ever spend time with Phyllis, his wife, or how would you describe Phyllis?
essentially the nights when we had times going out at the political campaign, at watching the returns come in, and all, Phyllis would obviously be at home, and she would have prepared a nice spread for the people who came to her house. She was always a very, very gracious lady. It's kind of in some respects, Jim could be, I think, a pretty um, in the world of politics. He was not a pushover, and Phyllis, on the other hand, as a person, was just the nicest lady you'd ever want to meet. I mean, she was just such a gracious and loving person. Um, in some respects, it's kind of hard to imagine the two of them together, because, like I say, Jim being, in the world of politics, which is kind of a nitty gritty uh, element, into find a person like Phyllis being his companion was really remarkable. But no, she was just a lovely person, and that's primarily the main. I guess my main interaction was kind of at her home then on the election eves. Um, there were a few other times. Like I say, she was good friends with our office manager, so there were times that she would come by the office and all. But yeah, just like I said, just a wonderful woman.
That's great. Um, are there any other things you'd like to just say before we close? And I've got one more thing to ask you.
No, I just think that Jim, that Indiana politics, well, also 1968, that's when Jim ran for governor to, or lieutenant governor that year. Um, and there again, Dick Bodine, who was congressman from up in northern Indiana. Uh, Dick was kind of a candidate who was running for governor at the time. Of course, and these were selected in state conventions at the time, not by primary, but at state conventions. And Dick Bodine and Jim were running for governor and lieutenant governor, and the nominations were on separate ballots. And Bodine lost. He lost the nomination for governor, and Jim won the nomination for lieutenant governor. And they had during the campaign, they had this huge cutout of Jim, uh, cardboard cutout that I remember is just kind of sort of uncharacteristic of seeing something like that. But in the eventual election, in that time, you elected both the governor and lieutenant governor on separate ballots. And that year, it is when the Republicans won the state, both the governorship and the lieutenant governorship. So Jim lost that election. But like I said, I just think that and is a very unique element of Indiana politics, and really was a force for bringing um, a more progressive side of Democratic politics to fore in the state and local elections. That I think, in many respects, we see continuing today. There are still obviously elements that are more conservative within the Democratic Party, but by and large, a more progressive Democratic Party is what I think emerged from his activities and others in the 1960s and beyond.
Did you ever have, this is obviously a personal uh, kind of question moment with Jim. It's weird to say, but one of your favorite conversations, or what are your favorite bonding times that it was just you and he talking? Was there anything that really kind of stands out that you remember? You were at this location, you're at the Capitol, you were this thing, or
No, not really. I think basically, I think he, like I said, I did the statistical analysis of the elections, and uh, I think he appreciated what I was doing and valued the information that I was able to collect, and uh, and that I and for having someone like Jim Beatty to respect the work you do, I think um, was a great compliment.
that's beautiful. All right. So in closing, what would you like to say to Jim directly?
Oh wow! I mean, last fall he was once again wanting to get together on election eve, and I don't get around that easily these days, and plus it would look like it was going to be a rainy night and all, and so I declined to go out to his house to sit with him on election eve, and I sort of regret not being able to do that again, because those were enjoyable times. Those are great times to get together on election eve and to share the results, good or ill, one more time. I regretted not being able to do that. And Jim, I just, like I say, he's had a remarkable lifetime, and those that who know him and whose lives he touched, I think, just cherish the time and wish him well in the future. And I know he's a few years older than I am, but I wish him well for many years yet to come, and as long as his health holds up.
He's still having those Saturday luncheons to talk about politics.
Yeah, I used to go to some of those, but I think I became a director of the local Irvington Historical Society, and the Saturday lunches. Yeah, I forgot about those. The Saturday lunches, I just sort of failed to. I would have to open the building up, the Historical Society out here in Irvington, and so I sort of stopped going to those luncheons. But yeah, those luncheons, those were great. The other things were now we did get together for Fridays. Had a Friday lunch there on on Madison Avenue, a place called Sisters, and we used to go there. I was part of the group that kind of went there a few times. But yeah, the Saturday lunches were great. And like I say, I hadn't been to them for a long time, but that's those moments gave you certainly a great interaction with Jim and Andy and others that would gather for those groups. And here's some of the old stories. I think it's wonderful that the family asked you to put this together, because I think one of the things is that we at least seem to overlook people who have been involved in politics, and politics is so important in how it's shaped our lives, how it shaped our communities, and the people behind that, like Jim, their stories are forgotten, and that's one of the things that's unfortunate, that they focus on, a lot of times they'll focus on elected people. I know the state legislature, there's a program there going by the state legislature to do interviews with the former members of the legislature and get their stories. But Jim never held an elected office outside of a party office, and the people who were essentially behind the scenes, if you will, their accomplishments are not recorded. And I can think of others in the past who I wish there probably would have been some sort of recording of their stories that we now have lost, and at least firsthand accounts. And at least Jim's will be there for others to enjoy in the future. And I just wish him all the best. He's a great guy and a great friend.
That was great, Steve. He will love it, and I learned a lot too. So I appreciate your time today. I will be following up with you, and I'm going to at this moment just close this one out, but just stay on the line.
Okay. All right. Take care.